All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Synergy. Let me introduce myself. My name is Patrick Murray. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management on the Mobility Platforms Group. I'm a recent member of Citrix. I was part of the XenPrize team that was recently acquired by Citrix in January. What we're going to go over today is how to integrate MDM into the enterprise. So in terms of the agenda for today, I want to start off with kind of defining the problem by explaining the changes in the computing landscape and how that's created certain problems for both the user as well as the admin in companies. And then I'll kind of go into a primer on how Citrix as a whole helps you solve that problem. And then specific for this presentation, we'll go into the device elements of that problem. It's actually a multifaceted problem. There's a lot of other sessions that I'll refer to you to go to later in the week that can talk about different aspects of the problem. But today, we're kind of focusing on that subcomponent of device management. And then for those of you who are just kind of embarking on the MDM journey and you're trying to figure out, these are very complex, robust products. It can be kind of daunting to understand where to start. I've collected what I believe are, from what our customers have been deploying, are the top 10 use cases for MDM. And where applicable, I will talk to you about how it plugs into your enterprise, by plugging into adjacent pieces of your infrastructure. And then at the end, I'll go over the tips on what some of our other customers have done in terms of what policies are they deploying, as well as some tips on how they have got their users to kind of accept MDM into the organization. And then I'll take questions at the end. All right, great. So you'll probably see this slide a lot this week, so I'll apologize in advance. But because I'm up first for this session, for the Synergy, I figured it'd be good to give you this context so you understand where we're coming from. So in terms of, everybody understands mobility is big and devices are flooding into the enterprise. I won't bore you with that again, but it generally, the way I constitute what the computing landscape has, challenges it's brought, is basically around three key areas, which is the idea around device choice, the ability to access business applications, which in turn really are kind of the other side of that coin, are giving you access to data, company data. And basically what the user wants is to be able to use the device they want, and obviously that continues to proliferate in terms of the number of devices and operating systems that are out there. And on top of that, they want to have access to all the data to help them do their job right alongside their normal personal information. And that's creating an issue for the IT team, right? And so the IT in mobility, it's really kind of strides two big problems, which is one is around security and the other one is around compliance, right? They don't want devices coming in that are going to infect their network and eventually lead to data loss. Depending on which vertical you happen to be in, there might be compliance ramifications to data loss. And so, so that they want to enable the employees too, because they don't want to be the bad guy. You guys don't want to be the bad guy, so you want to make sure, how can you turn mobility from a security problem into a business productivity enhancer? And this is one of the things that actually attracted me to XenPrize when I first joined, was I'd spent a lot of time in the security market, and it's basically an insurance play, right? You're basically justifying buying these products so that something bad doesn't happen. But it doesn't always translate into helping the business. And the nice thing about mobility is that it can kind of make you guys into business productivity enhancers. So you're not just insurance, you're actually helping the business propel forward by making the company more productive. So we really need to balance these two. You can't go fully to the end user side and let them have access to everything unfettered with no security controls. But on the flip side, you don't want to be so draconian and lock down the organization to the point where the employees are not productive. To give you a little bit of idea, 78%, this is a recent study that was done, of organizations have already kind of relented and have implemented a policy where they allow employees to bring devices into their network. So that doesn't necessarily mean that 78% of companies have actually deployed MDM, because that's not the data that we hear from analysts and from our own data. It seems like it's somewhere in terms of production rollouts, it's somewhere in the 25 to 30% range. But this is already happening, so the risk, surface area has increased for most IT organizations. So how do you solve this? And as I said before, this is a multifaceted problem, and it requires different tools to solve different elements of the problem. So while I'm going to focus on device management today, I wanted to kind of give you a primer of the entire solution so you have context, right? So, and we'll have different breakout sessions on each of these elements. So, as I said before, it's an app problem, it's a device problem, and it's a data problem. So from a device perspective, we have our MDM solution, and I'll be going over that in greater detail. From a data management perspective, we have our share file solution, which is an enterprise-grade document sharing and sync solution so that your data isn't just spilling out into the internet unfettered. And then we have a series of applications, right, that provide for those killer apps like email or browsers, right? We have our own products there that provide secure experiences in those apps. And we also have our MDX wrapping technology. So I encourage you to go to that session as well, because that allows you to take your line of business apps that may have just as secure information as email going through them and wrapping them so that you get the same set of data security controls and single sign-on, et cetera, on those apps as you would in our secure email app or secure browser, et cetera. And the last note I'll make that's important is, and I'm sure a lot of you folks, being Citrix customers, have this in place already, is the NetScaler is kind of that scalable network fabric that supports all of these applications. So one thing you'll find in the mobility space, the messaging sounds very similar, right? And I've been competing against, number of competitors for a long time, and they'll come out and say stuff that sounds very similar to ours. But one of the things that mobility is becoming is much more complex now, and the applications like email and web browsing has much more intensive on the network than some of the more primitive features of MDM originally had. So that's going to put demands on whatever's providing that plumbing in the back for your mobility offering. And NetScaler is a proven enterprise-grade fabric for you to be able to run all of this on. So that's an important thing to ask yourself and to talk, when you're deploying a mobile offering, where are you going to be 1, 2, 3 years from now, and do you have a scalable architecture that all of this is running on? So I'll be just going over this piece today, for sake of time. So we actually sell or package our products in two main packages. We have a XenMobile MDM solution, and we have XenMobile Enterprise. So XenMobile Enterprise was everything on the previous screen, but you can also purchase just the XenMobile MDM if that's where you want to start. And that's what I'll be pretty much going over today in terms of the features, just to kind of keep it straight in your head. And what XenMobile MDM does is it, on the admin side, it gives you security and compliance, and on the end user side, it gives them device choice. And I'll kind of go through just generically here how most MDM products work just in general. So this is not just necessarily specific to the XenMobile MDM solution, but it gives you an idea of kind of how do you do a rollout. What's that kind of? It has a natural life cycle of from beginning to end on how you would handle an end user. So the first thing is you're gonna configure, right? So that's around configuring policies in the first place. So what kind of policy do you want to have? An acceptable use policy, if you will. What kind of security profile do you want on the device to protect the company? And everybody's different, right? And the XenMobile solution has a lot of flexibility in terms of user groups, and you can define different policies for different users. And but this is kind of the first step, right? It's just defining what kind of security profile do you want to have for your mobile devices. And it may differ depending on if they're corporate owned or bring your own devices. Next thing is, this step is you kind of is enrollment. You provision the devices. This is something that's just the nature of the beast in MDM, right? You have to enroll the device, and you have to somehow, you have lots of devices out there. You have to push that profile out to a great number of people. So provisioning is kind of the next step. And then you need to start enforcing your security policies, right? So you've pushed out the policies, and then you're going to start enforcing those if they're not being compliant. So if somebody jailbreaks their device, et cetera, roots their device, start enforcing the policies that you have, and these will be done in an automated fashion, or you could do it manually, depending on how you want to roll it out. And then the next two steps are kind of life cycle. You've got everybody enrolled, they're using the devices, they're being enforced, and then you might get questions on support. We have a pretty robust support solution for devices. We can tell the device health and all of those things, and as well as we have ways to actually contact support directly if you're having trouble with your device or your app. Monitoring goes along the same way. We have a pretty robust monitoring tool, reporting and monitoring tool, that you can get status of all the devices in your organization and their level of compliance. You can run all kinds of ad hoc reports. There's a nice dashboard that you can kind of at a glance see where things are at, and I'll go into that in more detail. And at the very end of the life cycle is decommissioning. Now, decommissioning can mean several different things. Decommissioning can mean that the person has left employment, right? They've left the company, and now how do you pull that data back? Not sure what happened there. That must be getting decommissioned. Sorry. And so decommissioning, what it means is pulling back the access and the data, the corporate data that you gave to the user in the first place, right? But without disrupting the rest of their personal elements of their device. So I'm going to talk about this more later. You want to kind of avoid the full wipe thing. You want to do selective wipe. And we can do this kind of decommissioning when the person leaves the company automatically, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also, you can do it when a device is lost, stolen, or it's gone out of a compliant state. These are all automated actions that I'll talk about later. But this is kind of the natural life cycle of MDM. So that's kind of high level, right? But everybody says there's like 1,000 features in an MDM product. Where do I start, right? So what I did for sake of time, because I've only got about 30 minutes here, is I picked what I've found from talking to our customers are the top 10 use cases that people deploy, and also how where there are pieces in the infrastructure you have to plug into. I'll explain how that works as well. So the first one, and I'll do this somewhat in chronological order, like how I would do it, right, if I was just getting started, right? So the first thing is assessment. And one of the things that's nice about the XenMobile solution is we can actually do an assessment of devices before they're enrolled, right? So we can actually see all the unmanaged devices. And this is a clip from our dashboard. We actually have a very nice GUI that has about, 10 or so different widgets like this. And the cool thing about these widgets are, I always liked this about the XenPrise product when I first joined, is that these are actionable reports. So it's just not like static data that it's showing you. You can actually drill into this and actually define a policy based off the report. So if you saw something like, let's say you didn't like Android devices, right? And you said, I want to deny or block all Android devices from connecting to ActiveSync. I could actually click on that and change the policy dynamically, which is pretty cool. But what this is basically going to do is give you an assessment of the problem. You know, so if you're very new to MDM, you just don't even know how many mobile devices are connecting to ActiveSync, for example, we can give you a report right out of the box and tell you how that works, right? So you could say you have this many devices, these are the types of platforms that are connecting, and then depending on your organization, you know, some companies do what I call choose your own device, which is not exactly bring your own device. And they'll say, you know what, I'll allow iOS and Android, but I'm not going to allow anything else. So they can see who's connecting now so they know what kind of a problem they've got. It also is helpful for like developing mobile apps too, because sometimes people want to know, hey, what do I have to develop, what platforms do I have to support on the mobile line of business apps I'm developing? So it kind of gives you a picture of that too. So this is just kind of like assessing the problem, like a network assessment, if you will. The next step is to define user groups based on LDAP. So we integrate with LDAP directories, and this is pretty common in most business software, but it's important, and there's one important distinction of our product versus some of the others that are out in the marketplace, is that we do a real-time sync with AD. And the reason that's important with a mobile device management product is back to the decommissioning piece. If, for example, a person leaves the company, right, you don't want to wait 6, 12 hours for that person's access to be removed, right, from corporate email, corporate Wi-Fi, et cetera, right? You want it to be dynamic based on changes you've done in Active Directory. So it's doing a real-time query of that. So as people's status change, let's say I go from sales to accounting, and accounting has a different MDM policy, my status and my privileges on my device change immediately. So we make this easy for people by integrating into Active Directory and other forms of LDAP. The next one is about jailbreak detection. And this is something you want to do before enrollment, and then back to my monitoring comment, ongoing afterwards, because people might change their status after you've enrolled. So what our product will do is it'll actually check for being jailbroken or rooted before enrollment, just to prevent security threats. So there really isn't a user benefit in this one. This is pretty much an IT admin benefit, but it's a necessary one, and most people will understand that in terms of the employees. And it's just to make sure that devices and OS versions are compliant. And if for some reason, like John decides, 3 weeks later after he's enrolled, he's going to jailbreak his device, we have automated actions in our product, in the XenMobile product, that will automatically send them a push notification saying you better get compliant within X amount of time. It's configurable, or your privileges will be removed. Or you could do a selective wipe. I mean, it's up to you how you want to set that policy. But we can actually real-time monitor the status of the jailbreak detection. Probably the most popular thing you're going to get from your end users when you roll out mobile devices is, how can I get access to email? Now, I'll say this now because Citrix has a very comprehensive mobile solution. So we have different options. What I'm talking about here is if you want to go with the native email client, native iOS client, a touchdown, the native Google, the native Android email client. If you want to use any of those options, this is the use case for you. But we also have our own mail client that there'll be other sessions on. I encourage you to take a look at that if you want to have a even tighter security profile. And the main difference, just to give you a summary between this use case and our email mobile client, is email mobile client will actually provide you with encryption for the body of the email as well as any attachments, right? Whereas this is just controlling access or rights to access Exchange, right? And get your corporate email synced to your mobile device. So this is probably one of the most popular use cases that people will ask for. They'll want to ask, so the benefit for the end user is, hey, I get corporate mail. Everybody wants that on my mobile device. I get to use the device I want, and I get all this corporate information right next to my personal email client. The IT benefit is you get to decide what are the terms for getting access to Exchange. And the way this works, you can actually leverage your NetScaler investment if you have NetScaler, is that NetScaler kind of sits in the middle as the gateway, right? So as the devices are querying the Exchange server for access via the ActiveSync protocol, right, they'll actually do a call-out query to the ZDM server, or the XDM server, sorry, we renamed that. The XDM server, which is the XenMobile Device Manager server. The XenMobile Device Management server keeps an access control list. Think of it as a whitelist or blacklist of these are the devices that are allowed to have access to corporate email, right? And they send that in from, NetScaler queries that, right? And it says, are you on the list? Are you not on the list? If you're on the list, you get access. If you're not on the list, you don't get access. And this is all determined by the policies enforced by the XDM server, okay? So this is a big win for both sides because you're delivering, you're enabling the end user, but at the same time, you're providing it in a controlled and secure fashion, so you don't have rogue devices accessing corporate services. I'll go over how the end users are using the product today later in the presentation, but just for point of reference, this is the #1 use case that we get from feedback of our customers on what people have deployed. It's the most commonly used policy, which is enforcing passcodes. It's pretty straightforward. The XenMobile product is pretty robust. You can actually get pretty complex on how your passcode policy works. But I would caution against getting too draconian on this. If you make it too difficult for your end users, I hear about this from customers all the time, by creating a very onerous PIN code that they have to log into the device every time, that kind of gets people angry. Your end users will kind of revolt on you. You don't really want that. So I would just caution, it's a very good policy to do, but be careful about the level of complexity that you put out there. And one other piece is on iOS devices, just so you know, that the passcode complexity is actually directly correlated to the level of encryption on the data at rest on the device based on how iOS does encryption for data at rest. So that's just something to consider. And again, this is all defined up front. This is part of the configuration screen stage. Here's just an example of some of the things that you can do. You can control things like how, auto lock time, the length or lifespan of your passwords, etc. Another good win-win, where there's something in it for the admin, there's something in it for the end user, is PKI and the use of certificates. And for the IT admin, the benefit is obvious, right? You're creating stronger user authentication, right? But there's a benefit for the end user too, because they're getting single sign-on between email, Wi-Fi, VPN, and easier onboarding, right? So when I first joined the company, I want to know how I'm going to get access. Pull my device out. I want to have access to corporate Wi-Fi. I want to have access to email. You can pre-configure that all as you push out the package from MDM, from XenMobile, so that the onboarding for your employees is a much more pleasant experience, and they get access to all this cool stuff, which is what that's the big carrot in all of MDM, is I'm giving you access to all this corporate information, whether it be email, Wi-Fi, VPN. I'll talk about Wi-Fi and VPN in a little bit. Basically the way this works is when the device is enrolled, the XenMobile Device Manager will query the PKI server. It will then deliver the cert to the device. And then as the device is trying to authenticate, let's just say in this specific example that I have here on the screen, they're trying to access email. They'll go through the NetScaler. NetScaler will query the PKI server, validate the cert, and then allow the user to exchange and retrieve email. In terms of network considerations, some things, we support the majority of the most popular PKI vendors. Microsoft, RSA, OpenTrust, and Intrust is coming at the end of this quarter. So just so you know, for based on what you might already have in place, you can leverage those solutions. Okay, so use case 4. This is back to an access use case for benefit for the end user. So the IT can actually allow only managed devices to access their network. So again, if you don't want non-compliant devices connecting your network, this is a security kind of concern, not necessarily a compliance one. And from the end user perspective, it makes it a lot easier to get on board, as I said before, as well as you can leverage some of the cert-based auth that I talked about earlier to make it even easier for single sign-on. This is very popular as well. I'll have a screen on that later. Now, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation was how can you use MDM not as just a security product, but as a business enabler? And I always like this use case because, and we can actually do even more than this with some of the MDX technologies that you'll learn more about this week. But this is around app delivery. We're enabling the business because you're pushing productivity apps out to the users on their mobile devices, right? So this isn't necessarily a security play, but this is a very popular use case for a lot of our customers, which is how do you handle pushing out a line of business app to a great number of users in an efficient manner, right? So for the IT admin, the benefit is you can do mass distribution of apps. And from an end user perspective, I get access to apps that are probably a lot more usable than some of the arcane Windows servers apps that you might be used to, right? Or what have you, or they're just more mobilized. So I'm using it on the device that I like. So I would, I wouldn't characterize, I kind of think of this as like the one use case. It's not like some of the other security use cases that I've talked about, but it's also something I'll talk about later, which is, that people will use this to actually be a carrot to get people to enroll in MDM by delivering some cool apps to the end users. Okay, so device location. So one of the nice things that an MDM product can do that other solutions can't because of their level of where they sit on the device and their access to the APIs from the device manufacturer is that we can track location, right? And there's two primary uses for this that I've found with customers. The first one is just being able to track lost devices. So for corporate-owned devices, I have a restaurant customer that pushes out devices to all their stores. They don't just want them walking away, right? So if a device is stolen or lost, they can track it down easily without having to go into, find my iPhone for each individual one. You can do it in a mass way. The other benefit is if the end user hasn't implemented their Find My iPhone or whatever on their other devices, the admin can do it themselves. In fact, there's a self-managed portal for the users to be able to track their own device as well as lock and wipe their own device if they, so they don't have to contact the admin if they don't want to. And then the other big use case for this is what's called geofencing. And that goes hand in hand with automated actions I talked about earlier. So you can actually create policies that says, within this specific location, you're allowed to do X, Y, and Z. But when you leave this physical location, your policies change. And vice versa. I've heard use cases from like financial institutions that will want access to apps to only happen when they're in the vicinity of the location. And then when they go home, they don't have access. And I've heard the other way around too, which is, you can have access to these apps only when you're outside the location because maybe they're productivity drainers or what have you, but not inside the threshold. So it's really up to you. There's a lot of flexibility on how you do this, but it gives you this is one of those nuances to a mobile device that you couldn't necessarily do with a PC, right? It's this nature of mobility. There's all these cool use cases of mobility that I've heard over the, with apps and things like that where it's using things like geolocation or motion detection and things like that that you can use, right? That weren't weren't part of the paradigm with PCs, right? So this is something you can think about and wrap your head around on how you could use this in your own organization. And then, we get down to, the kind of decommissioning stage, which is what I talked about earlier, which is, I always like to talk about selective device wipe, because full wipe is a little bit too severe. And most of the customers I talk to do not employ full wipe for that reason. And there is an IT and an end user benefit in this, even though it's primarily IT, which is you get to remove access as an IT person, right, and get back all that data that you bestowed to the end user. And the end user benefit is, I didn't wake up one morning and all my photos are gone, all my personal apps are wiped, right? I just have had the corporate information wiped from the device. Now, we do allow full wipe. We also do things like remote lock as well. And one thing that we've found is that it's actually an important point is that we actually have an admin setting that allows you to make sure that admins could never do a full wipe, because some companies are so paranoid about that, they don't want even accidentally that to happen. So in the admin console, you can actually make it so that admins don't even have access to that policy if you want to make sure, really sure that that doesn't happen. So those are all the kind of the use cases, and one of the things that we've given quite a deal of thought to this, and we're actually adding some new things to the product in the release that comes out at the end of this quarter to make this even easier for people. Because when you first come into the MDM product, it can be kind of daunting, as I said before. So what we've added in the next release is this first-time users wizard, right, for first-time admins. So in the admin console that I showed you kind of earlier, you'll have this getting started wizard, which will allow you to do things like, how do I build a policy in the first place? We call them packages, right? And then how do I test enrollment on a device? Because maybe I've never done that before, right? It's a new paradigm. Some people have never even deployed an MDM product before. And then how do I get familiar with managing devices through the monitor, right? Through the reporting interface that I showed you earlier. There's a lot you can do on there. It can be, it's powerful, but it can be, you can get lost. So what we've tried to do is we added, these kind of simple wizards so you can get familiar quickly. You can define, these commonly used use cases that I've been talking about, set a Wi-Fi profile, policy or passcode or jailbreak detection, add an app. So you can get quickly up to speed and start getting value out of the product very quickly out of the box. That's the reason we built this. So this is coming soon. All right, so what have we learned from our customers, right, on how they've deployed MDM? So this is taken from our cloud report. We do this about twice a year. And what this does is it tells us, kind of anonymously, what policies are people deploying most commonly. And we don't get telemetry on everything, but you can see that the most commonly used policies are the PIN code policy, GPS, which is the tracking use case I talked about, geolocation tracking is commonly used. Wi-Fi profiles, like access to corporate Wi-Fi. And then this last one is called restriction of device resources of apps. It's kind of a mouthful. What that is whitelist and blacklist of apps. So you're allowed to use these apps on your phone. You're not allowed to use these apps. And you can go either way. You could actually do I've seen some customers do kiosk mode, where the only thing that's allowed to do on this device is one app, because maybe they're going out to the field and there's just a single app they have to do their job, right? Others could be, I just want to restrict and blacklist some apps because they're known to be either malicious or productivity drainers or liability or whatever your policy may be. And this is all up to you. You can determine what you want to do there. So the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about is, and this comes up a lot, which is, all right, I understand the technology, I understand how to kind of get it up and running and plug it into the adjacent pieces of my infrastructure. But there's this other kind of human element to deploying MDM, which is how do you get the user to cooperate and opt in? Because if they don't opt in, you're not getting the productivity benefits from rolling out a BYOD initiative, right? And what most successful customers have done when they rolled this out is employed this carrot versus a stick. And it's mostly carrots, and there's a stick at the end, kind of. To get people to accept MDM. And you don't want to have just one approach or the other, as I said earlier. From a carrot perspective, if you said all carrots, that would be the environment of I let everybody access my email, my corporate email. I don't even gate active sync at all. I don't even control that. I let everybody have access to email, and I let any device connect to my network, because that elevates your risk, right? On the flip side, if you just employ the stick method, which is you can bring any mobile device you want as long as it's a BlackBerry, then your productivity will drop, right? Because your employees will be unhappy, they won't be working, at all times. Not like they're working all the time, but they work when it's needed, right? They can work over the weekends and stuff like that. Well, if you be too draconian, you're not going to get those benefits, right? So you want to make sure you kind of balance these out. But there does need to be some, security controls in place. And if you do a good job in communication of why you need this, and you provide enough carrots, as you can tell from previous in the presentation, there's a lot of benefits in all the access that you're giving the employee. If you communicate that, most employees will understand. So one tip that you may want to employ is a sports apparel company of ours, a customer of ours, has created an app. So back to that app delivery, not only do they do app delivery for other apps, they've actually created their own line of business app that's only available if you enroll in MDM, right? That lets users find open resources or open conference rooms and things like that. And that kind of makes it more fun, or there's a benefit in it for the end user to enroll in MDM. I mentioned this earlier about PKI. You would always say, well, why PKI is going to matter to an end user? Well, single sign-on is a major benefit. It's actually a pain to have to authenticate every time you're trying to access a different service, whether it be Wi-Fi or email or what have you, or VPN. We had an oil and gas company that this was very successful. That they were able to strengthen their security, but at the same time provide something to the end user to reduce the number of steps they need to authenticate. And there's lots of those, right? I've talked about them before, so just for time's sake, I'll just skip to what they do to finally enforce. So I used to work in the data loss prevention space for a while, and this was a similar problem, which is when you start there was always a period of time that you go between monitoring and then start in enforcing, right? And it's a human thing, right? You got to make sure that people know that at some point down the line you're going to start enforcing, but you can't just wake up one day and just drop it on people, right? So what we found with a lot of customers who've deployed MDM successfully is they'll provide a window of time, or as I say, a time box, right? Which is you can have access to corporate mail right away, but in 30 days, if you have it enrolled in MDM, we're going to start restricting access to corporate mail or corporate Wi-Fi or what have you, right? All the elements of access that I explained earlier. So they create a time, and then they clearly communicate this up front, and then they warn the employees over time repeatedly so that they aren't shocked when all of a sudden that their email access is removed. And this is kind of the stick at the end, right? And when you do this, I think everybody wins. I think from an end user perspective, there's a lot of I think unwarranted fear sometimes about MDM. That's Big Brother and you're watching all the things that they can do. You're really not. You can't. You actually don't have line of visibility to that with an MDM product. But what you're really doing is you're giving all these tons of access to corporate data at the end of the day. And in return, you're just asking for what any rational person would understand, that the ability for the company to retrieve that information back if the person was to leave the company. And we're going to do so in a way that doesn't wipe the personal element of their device. So you got to communicate all of this to your end users, and I think that they'll accept the MDM, and then you get the benefits of the productivity as well as security. So a few other things if you want to learn more. We actually have a white paper on kind of the 10 must-haves. So by the way, all these presentations you're going to see will be made available, so you don't have to like take pictures. I see people taking pictures with their phones and stuff. It's fine. I don't mind, but it'll be easier for you to get it on. And I think it'll be available on June 3rd. I have a slide on it later. So there's a white paper on this, as well as on the website, we also published that cloud report that I referenced. And that was just a snippet from it. But there's actually some very useful information about, what are the most predominant devices that are being used in corporate, locations, what apps are being deployed, et cetera. So it's a good read, it's quick. And we do that, we do that periodically so you can see how it's trending over time. Before you leave, I wanted to reference a couple of different presentations that are going on for further information. So if you want to get your hands dirty and actually play with the admin console that I've kind of previewed with you today, there's a hands-on learning session. Anything with the HOLL is hands-on learning. 607, which is later today, that'll explain, in great detail, let you go into a lab and work with the product. And then there's two other kind of breakout sessions like this. One's on MDX. I suggest you go to that because that really is a very valuable technology if you're planning on rolling out your own line of business applications and you want to provide single sign-on, app-specific VPNs and data security controls around your app, right? Like, don't let this data be opened in other applications that are not secure. And then if you want to kind of get a primer on the entire solution, we have a solution that kind of talks about the other elements that I talked at the very beginning of the presentation around the full stack of everything that's in our full enterprise mobility management solution. So there's a lot more than this. I mean, there's things on ShareFile you should see, NetScaler, et cetera, but I thought these would be the most pertinent. One thing I would ask you is that if you could do a conference survey, it's available online by this Friday. There is a carrot in it for you guys, $30 Amazon gift card. So please give us your feedback. It's really valuable. We actually do listen to all the feedback. This is my first Synergy, but when I was being briefed on this before, I did get a lot of feedback on what you guys wanted to see. So please do that. And then it says here, the presentation will be available on June 3rd if you want to access any of this information. And there is in the Zen City Arcade, there's a game that you can go play called the Certified Rockstar ZenMobile Challenge. You'll have to go and find out what that is. I actually haven't seen that yet, but we encourage you to go see that. And then tweet about the session if you found it useful. And if you have any questions, I'll take them at this time. Anybody have any questions? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So let me repeat the question. So if you're a current ZenPrice customer, how do you migrate to this offering? So you don't have to do anything. Your current solution is continued to support. It's just renamed ZenMobile MDM. All your services and functions will continue to be supported. And if you want to move to the Enterprise Edition, we make that available too. And that includes like the cloud gateway elements for the app controller, for the MAM and solutions, as well as ShareFile, et cetera. So you don't have to do anything for your current subscription. It continues to be supported, and it's just a branding renaming change. Is there another question in front? Yes. Yeah, so the question is, for pushing apps, do you have to do it differently for iPad versus iOS? And we have enrollment, we have agents, separate agents for each of the major device types. So it does differ a little bit because they're different types of files, right? IPA versus APK. So but it's a very similar process, and you can create a very similar policy. Okay? Yeah? Yeah, so the question was, do we support Windows Phone 8? And I kind of, for sake of time, didn't go into all the complexity of our product, but one of the things that's really nice about the XenMobile solution is we support a wide array of devices. Certainly Android and iOS are the most predominant, probably Samsung being the most predominant of the Android versions. But we support all Android derivatives. You want to bring a Nook or an Amazon Kindle into your solution, into your environment, we actually will support that. We support BlackBerry, BlackBerry 10, Windows Phone 8, right? Windows CE, Symbian, right? So we have a pretty wide array. The one thing I will caution you, and this is the nature of the beast with MDM, is MDM solutions are somewhat dependent on the APIs that the handset manufacturers make available. And iOS and Samsung, for example, have a lot more APIs, and they're a lot more complex, right, than some other offerings that have just come onto the market, like Windows Phone 8. So we leverage, and our assurance to the customers is we leverage whatever APIs that we have access to, and we bring them to you as quickly as possible. So if you want a complete list of everything that's supported by device, it is available on our website. You can take a look at it. It's like an eye chart, right? But just know that in general, that's how it works. Like iOS has the most, Samsung's pretty close, and then it starts dropping off a little bit. But we do support basic functions like I mentioned today in terms of, assessment, inventory, access controls to email and Wi-Fi, block, and PIN code enforcement. Most of those basic policies work on almost every device.